Hello, I'm Jared Taylor with American Renaissance. What is race realism? It's a return to common sense. People who should know better have blinded themselves to the obvious. Race is a biological fact, and human races are different. We'd like to think that knowledge accumulates over time, but not in this area. It's just about impossible to go to college without being told that race is not a biological fact, that it's a social construct, just an idea. But there are people who look like this, and this, and this, and like this. These are obvious biological differences. Do these differences look like social constructs to you? Companies like 23andMe can tell exactly what your racial makeup is, even how much of you is British, Scandinavian, Iberian, Native American, right down to a fraction of a percentage point. But that just proves that DNA sequencing machines are tricked by social constructs, right? Even lice apparently are fooled by social constructs. That's why white children are 35 times more likely than black children to get head lice. Now, take a look at these two skulls, especially around the eyes. One is Chinese and the other is Australian Aborigine. A 5-year-old child could tell them apart as easily as he could sort cucumbers and zucchinis. Are the differences between cucumbers and zucchinis a social construct? Scientists at Ohio State University have found that you can tell someone's race just from the types of bacteria that live in his mouth. There are all sorts of race differences: gestation time, hair type, bone density, fat distribution, average height, age at first menstruation, twinning rates, brain size, myopia rates, disease rates, etc. Take twinning. Black Africans have identical twins at about twice the white rate, and whites have them at about twice the East Asian rate. Even within races, there are substantial differences. This is the Olympic 100-meter final. Every runner is not just black, they are blacks of West African origin. That's the way it's been in every 100-meter final in the last 10 Olympics, except for one Slovenian, Matic Osvnikar, in 2007. There he is, on the very right, finishing 7th. And here are the typical leaders in the long-distance events, all East Africans. Could it be that they're just better at these events than the rest of us? So what common sense tells you, what your own eyes tells you, is true. Race is a biological fact. It's not some screwy way of seeing differences that aren't really there. But there's tremendous pressure to deny the obvious. It's bad enough to point out that Jamaicans make better sprinters than Mexicans. But if you point out that the average Japanese is smarter than the average Haitian, oh, watch out. But why would anyone think that every group is equal? Why would you think that South American Indians, for example, could build a high-tech society just like the Koreans? Why would you think Congolese could have come up with nuclear physics or grand opera? There is no evidence at all for equality. There are about 14,000 school districts in the United States. In every one, East Asians get better grades than whites, and whites get better grades than blacks. Isn't the simplest explanation the most plausible? That Asians, on average, are naturally smarter than whites, and whites are smarter than blacks. Wherever you find Chinese, Hong Kong, San Francisco, Malaysia, Paris, Singapore, Berlin, or even right around the corner from where you live, they're doing well. Wherever you find blacks, they're usually not doing so well. Is this a worldwide white supremacist plot? As the authors of the book, The 10,000-Year Explosion, point out, the chances of every population group having evolved into a state of equality is as likely as tossing a handful of silver dollars on the floor and having every one of them land on its edge. Well, what does science tell us about this? Intelligence is under very substantial genetic control, and we're beginning to find out which actual gene variants make some people and some groups smarter than others. In a 2015 article in the academic journal Intelligence, PhD candidate David Piffer studied 9 different gene variants. Biologists call these alleles that are associated with intelligence. He chose these alleles because their effect on intelligence has been confirmed in several studies and their frequency has been studied in quite a few different populations. The results are no surprise. Whites and Asians are more likely than blacks to have the most favorable combinations. Piffer's findings can be graphed like this. On the horizontal axis is what is called a polygenetic score. This represents the effect of having favorable or unfavorable combinations of these 9 alleles. At the left are the least favorable combinations, the ones associated with lower intelligence. Here you find black populations. The most favorable combinations are towards the right, where you find Japanese and Northern and Southern Han Chinese. On the vertical axis are the best figures available for national IQ scores. As you can see, the clear trend is that as the polygenetic score increases, so does national IQ. The dotted line is the trend line. What this means is that on the basis of just these 9 alleles, you can make a pretty accurate prediction of national IQ. As science advances and more intelligence-related alleles are discovered, it should be possible to make even more precise predictions. Now, there are going to be many alleles that have an effect on intelligence, and this study is only a small part of the picture, but it is powerful evidence that racial differences in intelligence are due at least in part to genetic differences. Well, what are the chances the New York Times or the network news will tell you about David Piffer's study? 0. A lot of people don't want you to know this stuff. These people want to suppress the truth. And this leads to the question of why people deny the obvious and say there's no such thing as race. I think there are 2 reasons. First, if all groups are basically identical, that leaves only one explanation for why blacks don't do so well, and it's white racism. You can blame white people for black poverty, illegitimacy, crime, HIV rates, etc., etc., and if you make white people feel guilty, you can get things from them. The other reason to pretend there's no such thing as race is to soften white people up for being replaced. Well, how does that work? Today, there is a huge flow of people from non-white countries into white countries. Third world people from failed countries want to live in successful countries that they themselves couldn't have built. And white people are a soft touch. They have a record of letting in people from failed countries, especially people from failed countries. But white people are beginning to realize this is not a good deal. People from Haiti or El Salvador, Syria or Algeria are pouring in. And if enough of them come, native white people will be outnumbered and their countries will be permanently changed. However, if you can persuade white people that there's no such thing as race, that we are all absolutely the same, then it's okay if we're outnumbered and replaced, because we're being replaced by ourselves. Of course, if you swap out whites and swap in someone else, you end up with something different. We tried that in Detroit, and in Baltimore, and in South Central LA. So the reality of race is not just an academic question. It affects virtually every important social policy. It affects the very future of our country and of the entire West. And if we get this question wrong, there's only one group that's going to pay. That's white people. We better get it right. Thanks for watching. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, visit our website at amren.com.